I'm Lester Holt. Tonight on Dateline.
All over his head.
The police series started to fly.
Was it somebody that got a bad grade? Was it a coworker?
There was an ongoing nasty divorce.
He leaves the parking lot here and is heading back towards his house.
At that point, he is being hunted. The police have called this a murder for hire.
You can see the Prius pull up to the ATM. Her account went from nothing to a lot, virtually within weeks.
You had this connection to...
Did he ever joke about he looked into hiring a hitman, but buying you a TV as a divorce present would be cheaper? He did make that joke.
These guys didn't hire themselves.
I believe that the truth has a way of coming out.
Here's Dennis Murphy with Tallahassee.
It's the story of a brazen shooting, which would stump a team of law enforcement agencies. A saga that Dateline has been covering for 5 years.
It started as a true whodunit, or why did they do it?
It's as cold-blooded a killing as you can get.
It would expose the secrets of a bitter, messy divorce.
It didn't make any sense to me. It seemed totally random.
And ignite a family's search for justice.
You don't repair from that.
And tonight we have the latest developments in the case, with newly revealed evidence, new details, and bombshell testimony.
My stomach kind of flipped. It was like a chilling statement.
All of it forming the latest chapter in this explosive tale.
Do you know who killed Dan Markel?
No.
It was a beautiful July morning in this quiet as Dan Markel, a beloved and accomplished law professor at Florida State University, dropped off his 2 sons at school, swung by the gym for a workout, then drove up the driveway into his garage. Then the quiet was shattered. A neighbor heard shots and called 911.
911, what's the address of your emergency?
It's right next door to my house.
Dan Markel had taken 2 bullets to the head.
Inside, the car is running, and he's got blood all over his head.
The neighbor gave this ear witness account.
We heard a loud bang and a car pulled away from next door.
And while the neighbor only heard the shots, he did manage to see something.
That car was backing up. It was light-colored, white or silver. I want to say it was a Prius.
Word quickly started to get around that something frightening had happened in this peaceful Tallahassee neighborhood, bits and pieces.
I drove home, and I drove by Danny's house, and there was a police car in his driveway.
What did you think had happened?
I just didn't was responsible.
Asking the same questions. Who was in that Prius? And why would anyone want to kill Dan Markel? Investigators started by looking for the simplest explanation. What about the home invasion? Inopportune robbery.
The police shut that down relatively quickly. They were very fast to say that he was the intended target.
So then the question is, who wants him dead?
Right, and so that's when the theories started to fly.
There's a lot of moves.
Is an investigator for the Leon County State Attorney's Office and worked closely with the Tallahassee Police and the FBI on the case. He says they initially examined multiple theories, looking at hostile commenters on Markel's legal blog. He liked to ignite debate. He kept a blog site.
He did have one.
Some pretty sharp comments on there.
There was a lot of back and forth on there.
But for Dan, one commenter accused Dan of censoring posts on his blog, writing, "Bullies like this need to be made radioactive. Their arrogance and imperiousness speaks for itself. All means necessary must be employed." When Dan wrote back saying he felt threatened, the commenter replied, "You're worried about your home and private life being a target? What about your graduates' homes and private lives, or lack thereof? Evidence the disputes had ever left cyberspace. So investigators started looking into Dan's life at the university. Could it be as simple as a student who got a bad grade or got thrown out of the law school, coming back and taking his revenge?
All of that was taken into consideration. Was it somebody that got a bad grade? Was it a coworker?
So investigators interviewed his students and fellow faculty and combed through his email to see if there was any suspicious correspondence, any fruit. Investigators started taking a hard look at Dan's personal life. It turned out his marriage to another accomplished legal professional, Wendy Adelson, had ended in divorce. A messy one. Very bad.
Wendy Bear and Danny Bear.
Even wrote a novel about human trafficking titled, This Is Our Story.
She was also very bright. She was really amazing.
The two married in 2006 and settled here in Tallahassee, both taking positions at FSU Law School. Pretty soon, their 2 sons came along.
Dan loved the boys more than anything else in the world.
To be a grandmother.
I loved it. They were very, very nice boys.
Our second speaker is Dan Markell.
But Dan was often away. He was a sought-after speaker at legal conferences across the country, including this appearance for the Federalist Society.
I guess I've been working in the realm of punishment theory for the last dozen years or so.
Dan's career was in high gear, but trouble was brewing at home.
Wrong. How much did she tell you?
Quite a bit. She believed that he didn't see her as an equal in the marriage.
It was about her happiness.
Right. She just was not happy with him and what he was able to give her.
The day came in September 2012. While Dan was away traveling for work, Wendy packed up the kids and left divorce papers on the bed.
It's really out of there, wasn't she?
She was.
Just about cleaned the house out, as, Danny would talk about it in court documents later.
Yeah, she took everything that was important to her and to the kids.
Wendy got her own place in Tallahassee, and a War of the Roses-style battle began.
I think it had been built.
The battle waged for 2 years as each accused the other of lying and hiding assets.
Tons of issues, but was the large one where the kids are going to be raised, where they're going to live?
The children were everything.
This motion in the divorce with a key demand. Never a fan of Tallahassee, she wanted to move.
As I understand it, Wendy Adelson wanted to take the children with her and move closer to her family in South Florida.
Absolutely.
6-7 hours away. Was that the question?
That was the initial question.
And family law court said you cannot do that.
If the children are here in a stable environment and the father can participate fully with the raising of the children, the law prefers that and should. That mental change in the facts occurred.
Dan and Wendy's divorce became final in 2013. It was a painful time for both of them. But by the summer of 2014, Wendy was dating a fellow professor. Dan had found someone new, too. He visited Josh in New York that July. Did you see the lights go back on in Danny?
Yes. Met someone again. He was genuinely happy.
But the custody arrangement was still an irritant on both sides.
50-50 sharing arrangement with the kids.
Absolutely. And he availed himself of every second. And quite frankly, wanted some time that maybe she found offensive. He wanted more.
Over and a car was backing up.
The neighbor described seeing a silver or white Prius leaving the scene. Tracked down Jeff Lacasse.
Coming up.
I'm not the only man who's been unearthed,
A boyfriend carrying a torch for Wendy and a grudge against Dan.
I probably said 100 times in public that I like to kick his ass.
Wendy said some things that made police curious about her recent boyfriend, Jeffrey Lacasse. So 3 days after Dan Markell's murder, they found Lacasse and brought him in for an interview.
Okay. All right. Mr. Lacasse, I appreciate you coming in and talking with me here. Like I said, we're still in the preliminary stages of this investigation.
Yeah.
You're Wendy,
of course,
which is his ex-wife, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah.
It's pretty clear, even from that initial interview, that the police, they're interested in Jeff's relationship with Wendy.
Journalist Matthew Scher has been so intrigued by the mysteries of the Markell murder, he created a widely admired podcast about the case called Over My Dead Body.
A case that says at least as much about marriage and love as it
is still in love with Wendy at that time. And yeah, look, of course the police must think, Jeff didn't like Dan either, again, by his own admission.
In the interview, Lacasse openly shared those feelings of love for Wendy and jealousy for another man he learned she had been seeing on the side.
She's always traveling, and otherwise she's booked, so I was always a little suspicious about that. Now she always just told her not to see this guy again. I said, you don't want to talk about it? That's fine. I just don't want you to see him ever again. And
what'd she say?
She said, okay. He's moving in a week anyway. And I said, okay, problem solved,
But it turned out Wendy did see that other man again, and Lacasse caught them together.
Did you confront him then?
I didn't. I started walking towards him, and the temper started flaring. I thought I do not need to end up getting arrested for assault on all saints. God, path. It was her worst nightmare.
But she saw you there, so...
No, I let her see me, but I never confronted them. I just got out of their way, because I didn't want to cause a whole scene.
Okay.
And that's when we started fighting, because I lost all trust. They were were times throughout the spring semester that I'm 99% confident that she was seeing both of us. There were all kinds of signs and stuff. Getting home at 9:30 at night, things like that.
He said he even snooped through her calendar, getting suspicious for Dan's murder. Lacasse got that email from Wendy. She wanted to take a break.
Have you met Wendy?
Not personally.
Very charismatic and very good at, once you date this girl, you just do anything for her. I'm not the only man that's been under her thumb in that way. She really has this charisma and this sexuality, and so, you throw yourself in front of a bus for this girl.
Did you think Lacasse was still head over past tense, but he didn't see it that way?
No, I think he would have loved another chance.
To police, Jeff Lacasse seemed straight out of Central Casting. The jilted boyfriend, a man who made no secret of his dislike for Dan, using some choice words we can't repeat here.
I certainly know the Danny, Markel, and Wendy story. I've been living through all this court with her for the last 9 months, so. Wendy was afraid of Danny. Wendy would almost have a panic attack if she doesn't disclose information easily. I wondered if he used to beat her ass. I didn't know, but she seemed out of proportion for a guy who's just kind of a general dick.
Given everything Lacasse was saying about Dan, police had to wonder if he might have turned his anger into action. The detective wanted to know his whereabouts around the time of the shooting.
Friday I drove to Tennessee, Harrogate, Tennessee, born East on Central.
What's the color of this 2004?
It's metallic gray.
Metallic gray. The witness had described a white or silver car. Sounded close.
You've never had any kind of physical contact with Danny?
No. I'm surprised you guys didn't call me earlier, though, because I probably said 100 times in public that I like to kick his ass, because he kept really making Wendy suffer and things like that.
Right.
But no, I would never. I'm a professor. I'm not going to put...
He didn't.
He's got friends who can vouch for him. He's
alibis. Both Wendy and now Jeff Lacasse had them. Neither was a suspect. It was time for the police to find that car.
Coming up, and
he leaves the parking lot here and is headed back towards his house.
At that point, he is being hunted. They're not going to let him out of their sights.
They're not.
When Dateline continues.
In the days after Dan Markel's murder, another. Those closest to the law professor, those who liked him and those who didn't, all provided seemingly solid alibis for the time of the shooting. A service for Dan at his Tallahassee temple was packed with friends and FSU law school colleagues.
How did Wendy seem to be taking it?
She cried after the ceremony, as you would expect, and she was overwhelmed and totally distraught in the wake of these boys.
After the memorial service, Wendy moved to South Florida with her 2 boys. Back in Tallahassee, meanwhile, homicide detectives were stumped. Their best lead from the crime scene was a thin one. It came from Dan's neighbor, who thought he saw the getaway vehicle and made the 911 call.
It was light-colored, white or silver. I want to say it was a Prius.
The eyewitness was vague about the detectives canvassed homes in Dan's neighborhood, seeking surveillance video that might have captured the vehicle. No luck. But maybe someone had been tailing Dan on that fatal day. Cops retraced his movements that morning, looking for clues.
So, Jason, he's dropped the kids off at the preschool, roughly, 5 minutes to 9, something like that?
Close to that.
And then he's driving right down this road to go to the gym.
Cops found security video of
You could see him checking in. We did see him scan his key card in.
Then police checked security cameras outside the health club and hit a forensic home run. What do you know? There was a Prius that resembled the getaway vehicle described by the neighbor eyewitness.
In the video, you see them tail him across this road right here. And then he cuts in and parks, come on around this way.
The vehicle can be seen moving around the parking lot as if to get a better view of the exit. At 10:34 a.m., Dan leaves the gym. When Dan drives out of the parking lot, the Prius is 20 seconds behind him.
He leaves the parking lot here and is headed back towards his house.
At that point, he is being hunted. They're not going to let him out of their sights.
They're not.
Cops knew they were on the right to make out the Prius's license plate or identify anyone inside. By then, more than a week had passed since the murder. That's when a Tallahassee cop had an investigative brainstorm. City buses all had cameras, right? What did they record? He collected surveillance video from buses driving near Dan's neighborhood around the time he was shot. Bingo. There at 10:47 a.m. on the southbound driving toward the Markel house. And investigators discovered another video from another bus recorded moments after the murder. There was the same Prius heading away from the scene of the crime.
You have a lot of active movements in the passenger seat, which would make you believe there's two people in the car.
Forensic experts screened those surveillance videos again and again. They couldn't read the license plate in 2009, and they figured out its color, a paint Toyota calls silver pine mica. Law enforcement would spend months learning just how many silver pine mica Priuses were driving around the Sunshine State. With hundreds of Priuses to check out, the investigation ground on. More than a year passed.
We were in touch with the police. They kept in contact with us, but there was this Prius.
But on very careful inspection, those bus images had gleaned some nuggets. On the windshield of the Prius was a Florida SunPass gadget, one of those devices for making automatic toll payments. Now investigators started looking for silver pine mica Priuses that used SunPass around the time of Dan's murder. And finally, 500 miles south of Tallahassee, they found one that had done toward Tallahassee the afternoon before Dan was killed. What's more, the same SunPass dinged the very same turnpike exit in the opposite direction on the day Dan died. Time-stamped 5:23 p.m. The timeline fit the shooting window perfectly.
It was assigned to an actual business.
The SunPass business account came back to a small car rental agency in North Miami. Cell phone number and correct Miami address were on the form. Also on the paperwork, cops found another cell phone number marked simply Brother. You've got one name. How do you get the second name?
The second name came through phone records and a whole lot more investigation. And then you finally get a number that stands out. And that's how you end up establishing Sigfredo Garcia.
Two names Rivera. Both had criminal records. Garcia had been arrested for robbery and burglary, and Rivera was a member of the Latin Kings gang. With names, addresses, and phone numbers, detectives contacted Rivera and Garcia's employers and banks, looking hard at ATM transactions.
And they were able to locate a withdrawal from a bank down in Pembroke Pines.
This is on the day of the
murder? It's the date of the homicide. And you can see Luis Rivera driving, and he sits forward, and you can clearly see Sigfredo Garcia sitting in the passenger seat.
There, on the day of Dan Markel's murder, were their two prime suspects, together in a silver pine mica Prius that was a perfect match for the vehicle seen stalking Dan. It had taken cops nearly 22 months to make their case. Sigfredo Garcia and Luis, both men pleaded not guilty. But it was far from case closed. The arrests only deepened the mystery of Dan Markel's murder. Why would two guys from South Florida, who apparently had no contact with Professor Markel, drive 500 miles to kill somebody they don't know?
That's what we're all trying to get to.
Coming up, a growing suspicion
came up here for him.
And an odd joke from Wendy's brother, Charlie.
He said, I looked into hiring a hitman and it was cheaper to get you this TV.
The garage. Cops had two men in custody. The accused, Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera, were occasional Miami construction workers with criminal histories. From the moment the pair were arrested, suspicions about a larger conspiracy had swirled. Tallahassee Police Chief Michael DeLeo faced the media.
Would you characterize this as a murder for hire?
Since there's no known relationship between, that obviously it was not a random act that they came up here for him.
Dan's friends also thought there had to be more to it.
These guys...
Investigators believed if they learned more about their suspects, they'd come closer to figuring out who put them up to the killing.
Garcia has less of a criminal history than Rivera, but also, pretty bad actor.
They discovered that right after Dan Markel's death, the two men went on a spend his new toys on Facebook. Here are the two on their bikes. It seemed they'd come into major amounts of discretionary cash. But where had it come from? Who was the paymaster with the money, the malice, and the desire to see Dan Markel dead? Stymied detectives went back into their notes and delved deeper into the legal filings that flew back and forth during Dan and Wendy's divorce. The documents led the gaming underworld to a highly respected and prosperous family of professionals, the Adelsons, Dan Markel's in-laws.
It had never been a particularly good relationship between Dan and Wendy's parents. There was not a lot of love lost between the two families.
How toxic did it get? Well, cops discovered that in the divorce suit Markel versus Markel, Wendy had a forced series of emails obtained by Dateline. She encouraged Wendy to go low, fight dirty. Hi, honey, it's time for action. Let's show this F what will make him absolutely miserable. Wendy's mother reminds her daughter just how high the stakes are for their family and to behave accordingly. The rest of your life, and consequently, Dad's, mine, and yes, even Charlie's, will be affected by how well you can perform.
There were emails that were collected throughout this process, and there was communication between Wendy and Donna about just to offer him $1 million until he'll raise the kids in a certain way.
Just go, here's $1 million.
Yeah.
Donna Adelson laid out that plan to get Dan out of the picture in another email to Wendy. We're planning on you, Charlie, and Dad and I going as high as equal parts in a each of us. In fact, Dan's tension and ill will toward his mother-in-law was going off the charts. 3 months before his murder, he filed a motion asking the court to prevent his sons from spending unsupervised time with Wendy's mother.
What's the backdrop of this thing? One of the grandchildren said, basically grandmommy hates daddy, and had made some other remarks around Danny that suggested that she had
grandma poisoning the kids.
No.
Wendy also put her parents smack in the middle of the homicide investigation with a seemingly offhand remark during her police interview.
It's like my parents had more reason to dislike Danny than almost anyone else. He hurt their daughter.
But Wendy's folks harming Dan Markel seemed improbable given their circumstances. Her dad, Harvey, was a prominent dentist who, along with her mother, a family concern, featured in this promotional video.
My name is Dr. Charlie Adelson, and I am a periodontist.
Wendy's older brother, Charlie, had a lucrative implant practice.
What I love about what I do is being able to restore people's smiles.
Dr. Charlie was also a flashy figure around the Miami area with some eye-catching rides.
He lives... he's got the sports cars with the license plate that say Maestro. He's got a grotto and pool in his backyard.
Investigators knew that brother Charlie was a confidant of Wendy's. He had her back. She even brought it up in her interview.
My brother, his name is Charlie, the one I'm really close to, he knew Danny treated me badly, and it was always his joke. He said, I TV, so instead I got you this TV. He would never. He's my big brother, and he's been taking care of me since I was little.
Would you think that this guy Charlie would even be capable of doing something like this?
No.
Let's just talk.
He's the joker.
Okay.
Maybe, but the prosecutors weren't laughing.
According to Wendy Markel, or Wendy a joke.
But it's a very strange thing to say.
Very. In light of the circumstances, wouldn't be any big deal if he was alive and well with us.
Investigators asked Wendy's ex-boyfriend, Jeffrey Lacasse, to come back for a second interview. He had some reservations about possible media coverage.
I watched Dateline enough that I could just imagine that me being presented with these pseudo-suspects, that's how they do it,
I don't think they're going to do that.
That Charlie really had looked into hiring a hitman.
I want to make sure I understand this completely.
Please.
Charlie did look into having
Danny killed last summer. It would cost about $15,000. And that's not exactly word for word, but that's pretty close to what she said.
It's the second time now you're having.
That's right.
It was all very interesting, this smoke gathering around Wendy's family of dentists. Now, a new witness for the prosecution just might be able to cut through the haze. Coming up.
Garcia told me, what we coming up here for? Coming here to kill somebody.
A suspect flips and suggests a possible murder, a suspicious link.
She is the recent ex-girlfriend of Charlie Adelson, Wendy Adelson's brother.
When Dateline continues.
The two men charged with the murder of FSU had been locked up for nearly 5 months when prosecutor Georgia Kappelman got the word. One of them wanted to cooperate. Who cracks?
Rivera ultimately gave a statement.
Why does he give it up, do you think?
Save his own skin.
In exchange for a reduced sentence, Rivera agreed to plead guilty to second-degree murder and promised to tell all. The Miami gangbanger spun a chilling story about...
Did you ever meet or know or hear of Daniel Markell before this occurred?
No.
Never heard of him? Never knew anything about him?
No, sir.
What about Wendy Adelson?
Not either.
Cops wanted to know, if he'd never even heard of Markell, then just how did Rivera end up in that Prius with Sigfredo Garcia and...
Boy. Okay. I robbed drug dealers. Okay. I thought we were going to come in here and rob somebody. You know? So when I get in the car, that's when Garcia told me, what we coming up here for? Coming here to kill somebody.
Rivera said Garcia told him he had a contract to kill Markell and needed his help.
I'm going to kill this guy. You're going to get paid this much. $35,000. We're driving. Markell. I don't need the name. Forget about the name because I'm not going to remember the name. Just show me the picture.
Were you the one he was hiring to do the murder? Because I don't understand why you need two people to commit a murder.
They were hiring him.
Okay.
They were hiring him. They were not hiring me. They were hiring him. He said he's going to pay me to go with him because he didn't want to go by himself.
The night before the murder, Rivera said, they checked into a motel not far.
Went to Markell's house. I waited for him to come out. When he came out, I followed him with Garcia in the car to the daycare. He gets to the daycare. I'm just driving in circles. As he comes out, we follow him again.
The next piece of Rivera's story was supported by the surveillance video the cops collected.
2 hours at the most. Got there. So when he came out of the gym, I followed him home. As I'm following home, he goes around the back. I go around the front. We met him right in the garage. I was maybe 3 or 4 feet away from his car. Garcia jumps out. I think Markell was on the phone that day. Shot him twice. Got in the car. We left. Kid's driving.
I mean, it's as cold-blooded a killing as you can get. To drive all the way to Tallahassee and pull up into someone's driveway that you don't know and just shoot him in cold blood.
We dumped the gun towards a bridge. Can't remember.
Investigators looked at bridges on the route the Prius traveled, trying to find the murder weapon.
We tried to locate it, put Rivera in a van and drove him from Tallahassee all the way almost to Alligator Alley, and he couldn't pick out which location it was again.
So do you believe this guy? He's got a bad record.
A lot of what he tells you can be corroborated with evidence, and that's what you go with.
Garcia and his involvement in Dan Markell's killing. In his proffer, Rivera offered an answer to the cops' biggest question. What was the motive for Dan Markell's murder?
Because I asked him, why are you going to kill the guy? Because the lady wants her 2 kids back. She wants full custody of them kids. Because he had all the custody. That was the plan, that was the deal. That's what I went to go kill that man for.
He said someone else was involved. It was a woman whose name came up when investigators leaned on Rivera about how Garcia, whose nickname is Tuto, knew the motive for Dan's shooting.
How did Tuto know all this? Katie, I guess Katie told him everything.
Katie? Who was Katie? And did she know who paid to have Dan Markell murdered?
Coming up.
Make sure you have no money.
A mystery woman with links to the accused killers and the Adelson family.
She was getting a paycheck from the Adelsons.
Luis Rivera had told police of outbound lanes just outside Lake City, Florida. He was heading home to Miami.
I'm driving and looking at the rear mirror looking for the police the whole time.
Back in Tallahassee, Dan Markell was on life support. But Rivera told police his partner Sigfredo Garcia wasn't thinking about the man he just shot. He was thinking about a woman.
He called her and he said, everything is done. Make sure
Was Garcia's common-law wife, the mother of his children, Katie McBonowa.
Do you hear her on the other
Yeah, I
end?
can hear it. She goes, okay, I know, all right.
Okay, I know, all
Yeah,
right.
like, I'm like, yo, does she know?
But it's Katie's voice.
Yeah, it's Katie's voice, 100% it's Katie's voice.
Katie McBonowa was a name the detectives already knew very well. Their investigation had turned up some critical details about her.
She was a real estate company. She was employed at a bar at one point.
A modest income at best. Yet in a curious bit of timing, Katie's cash flow and South Florida standard of living suddenly improved after Dan Markell was murdered in Tallahassee.
Started looking at her bank accounts, and her bank account for the end of 2014 through 2015 went from $1,000 cycling through in less than a year.
In fact, on the day after the Markell murder, Luis Rivera says Garcia and Katie personally delivered a bag full of money to his house.
When I get there, Katie's upstairs. I grab the bag, I take the money out, stick it in my pocket.
He says he got 30.
If Katie was the one paying off the two murder suspects, investigators naturally wanted to know who was paying Katie. Once again, it was Katie's bank account that provided prosecutors with a tantalizing in-laws.
She was getting a paycheck from the Adelsons.
$400 and change.
Correct.
Was there any obvious work that she was doing?
There was no obvious work that law enforcement was able to uncover, so she wasn't physically going there. She wasn't doing anything on the phone. Nobody that worked there seems to know what it was that she does or had ever seen her working there. Yet she's drawing a paycheck.
The checks were signed by Donna to the Adelsons ran a lot deeper than a few canceled checks.
Because she is the girlfriend or recent ex-girlfriend of Charlie Adelson, Wendy Adelson's brother.
So there's your hit guys. One of them has a girlfriend, Katie McBonowa, who has also been a girlfriend of Charlie Adelson?
Correct.
So she's in the middle of these two camps.
She's been romantically linked to the victims.
Boy, that's straddling two worlds. A review of DMV documents also revealed that Katie was driving a Lexus that came from the Adelsons.
She did get a car that was previously in the name of Harvey Adelson, who's the father of Charlie, and was, I think Charlie gave her the car. It was retitled into her name, and there was a nominal payment for that vehicle.
Generous? You bet. But upgrades.
We were informed at one point that Charlie paid for half of her breast augmentation.
Done by a guy known in South Florida circles as Dr. Bubner?
Dr. Bubner, yeah.
By the summer of 2016, investigators were connecting so many dots that they seemed to be running together. Podcast producer Matthew Scher.
Sigfredo Garcia had a relationship with Katie McBonowa, had kids with Kelly Adelson. That is the connection. Dan on one end, Rivera, Garcia, and Katie on the other.
Investigators believed it all made for a tidy theory. Their problem was they couldn't prove what they all suspected. That Dan Markell's in-laws paid to have him killed.
Coming up, E. Adelson's mother.
Excuse me, Mrs. Adelson? How you doing? Just want to give you this.
And detectives say Charlie Adelson wasn't happy about it.
He uses the word we'd have to kill this guy, right?
Yeah.
When Dateline continues.
On the Markell murder investigation, detectives believed they had a theory that explained it all. They had two suspects they could put in Tallahassee on the day of the murder, and in a car that matched the one spotted leaving the scene. They also identified a woman in Miami, who, in their theory, seemed to be the link they were looking for between the hitmen and Dan Markell's former in-laws. What they didn't have was any of
communication with anybody that we can find or that anybody will tell us that says the Adelsons are involved.
You can't get from the killing in the driveway to Katie to the Adelsons.
No.
In an effort to connect the Adelsons to the murder plot, in late April 2016, investigators decided to put a squeeze on the family in the form of an FBI undercover sting. The mother blurted out something incriminating.
Excuse me, Mrs. Adelson? How you doing? Just want to give you this.
He's an FBI agent, and he is going to approach Donna Adelson on the street and imply that he is somehow affiliated with Luis Rivera, and give her a piece of paper which contains an article about the homicide, and written on the letter is $5,000 and a phone.
We know that your family is taking care of Katie and her friends for quite some time after your problem of North has been resolved.
He says something to the effect of, "You're taking care of Katie and Garcia, but you're not taking care of my boy." He doesn't say the name, but the implication is that it's Rivera.
I want to let you know that my brother is incarcerated. I'll make sure that he's going through some rough times, and we want to make sure that you take care of what he's going through, the way you're taking care of Katie and Susan. Well, this will explain.
So this is an extortion, a blackmail letter.
Yes. It's designed to give Donna the impression that she's being blackmailed for $5,000 on behalf.
It ruffles her feathers.
Yeah.
I got some paperwork hand delivered to me.
You're being sued?
No, that's what I thought it was, but I'm going to need to talk to you.
Does it involve me or other people?
Well, probably both. So you probably have a general idea what I'm talking about.
All right.
So let's just find some time to talk to each other.
And she doesn't say the craziest thing happened to me today. This guy came out of the blue, gave me this crazy blackmail note, and I don't know what he's talking about. That's not the way the conversation occurs.
That's not exactly what she said, no.
You think someone's trying to blackmail you?
Maybe.
That's crazy.
After that cryptic conversation with his mother, Charlie Adelson called Katie.
Hello?
Hey, what's going on?
Over the next few days, they were in almost constant contact, which of course is exactly what investigators were hoping for.
I don't know what's going on, but my mom, she said, handed her an envelope with something in it.
Yeah.
And she really wouldn't go into detail. And I have no idea what this is in reference to. But something regarding her son, something regarding his ex-girlfriend, and the person asked.
They were speaking in code.
Good properties come up all the time. Tell the people you work for I'm very interested.
Okay. I will. We definitely need the business.
There's no smoking gun. No one says, this is exactly how this went down.
Maybe not, but the undercover operation and all those tapped phone calls offered investigators a roadmap.
It shows them getting extremely worried as they feel the noose tightening a little bit. And when you listen to these wiretaps, you can hear it. You can hear real fear, especially in Katie's voice.
And whenever they dared speak of the attempted blackmail in person, they seemed to prefer noisy public places.
There's a conversation at a booth in a restaurant which was surveilled. The station has had about how to proceed with dealing with the undercover.
The conversation is hard to hear, but according to the transcript published in the state's probable cause affidavit, Charlie tells Katie to try to figure out if the man who approached his mom really is a blackmailer, and what to do if he is. You better kill, have someone else do it.
Into this crime.
Though the FBI sting produced some intriguing conversations, in the end, it did not produce any evidence of complicity. Dan Markel, they were going to need more than those surveillance tapes. But at least for Katie Magbonwa, prosecutors believed they had a case they could make. In October 2016, she was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. She pleaded not guilty.
Good luck to you.
Setting the stage for a momentous trial for Magbonwa and her companion, Sigfredo Garcia.
But first, one of Charlie Adelson's ex-girlfriends takes the stand. She noticed a change in Charlie after the accused killers were arrested.
He was nervous and worried and just not himself.
Sigfredo Garcia and Katie Magbonwa had been partners in life and were now alleged partners in crime. Their trial began in Tallahassee in late September of 2019, more than 5 years after Dan Markel's death.
All right.
Prosecutor Georgia Kappelman laid out the evidence for a conspiracy to murder Markel that had been months in the plan. Linda took the stand to say she had also seen some unusual packaging of cash at Charlie's house.
I did mention that there was a staple on one of them, so I kind of joked to him about it.
In fact, you said that the money was stapled into stacks of $100 bills, didn't you?
They were hundreds, yes, and I don't know if they were stacks, but...
Seeking to prove Charlie was Katie's paymaster, they pointed to him as the mastermind who set the hit into motion. They called the dentist an unindicted co-conspirator. The prosecutor asked his ex about...
And worried.
Was he doing things like sleeping with a gun?
He did, but he usually does that.
As she continued to follow the money, Prosecutor Kappelman brought in a banking expert to analyze that series of mysterious cash transactions into Katie's accounts.
What does it contain? Miss Magbanua's Bank of America bank records.
Including all those checks from the Adelson family. And Kappelman put on Wendy's ex, Jeff Lacasse, to say Wendy told him that brother Charlie was prepared to go nuclear in the Adelson-Markel family feud. That he had taken steps toward hiring a hitman.
She said that Charlie had explored all options to take care of the problem, and that he had looked into having Professor Markel killed. It would cost about $15,000.
July 13th of 2014.
Yes, ma'am.
That was less than a week before Dan's murder. Kappelman showed the jury video of that FBI sting operation against the Adelson family. The wiretap surveillance of Katie, Charlie, and his mother afterwards.
Sounds like a cop is fishing, that's or an investigator, or someone's playing games.
They said my name and your name. It's getting too detailed.
Orchestrated conspiracy. But since the Adelsons were not charged with any crime, would the jury believe the prosecution's theory? It would all come down to the testimony of two bombshell witnesses, the two women at the center of the case. Dan Markel's ex-wife, Wendy, and her brother Charlie's ex-girlfriend, Katie Magbanua.
Coming up, Katie and Wendy.
Beach.
Is Katie about to throw Charlie under the bus?
Based on everything you've seen, do you think Charlie was involved in this?
Yes.
When Dateline continues.
The prosecution's case had been building to this moment Adelsons they'd heard so much about. 5 years after that tearful interview with police, Dan Markel's ex-wife had returned to Tallahassee from South Florida, where she now lived with her two boys.
My name is Wendy Adelson.
Wendy had been cleared as a suspect early on in the investigation, but prosecutors wanted to hear from her. So she was given immunity to testify. Her statements on the stand...
A plot to kill Dan Markel?
No.
The prosecutor probed Wendy about her marriage and messy divorce from Dan.
Would you consider your divorce with Mr. Markel to be a nasty divorce?
I think most
Knew that he got the money from the lady, and he never said her name. That's what you said on 10-4, right?
I don't remember.
Don't remember.
Chris DeCoste, another Magbanua attorney, attacked the state's case by suggesting Rivera was simply parroting,
just regurgitating what you had written in your reports as to what you thought the theory of the case was, right?
I have no way of knowing what he had access to at that point.
The defense implied that media coverage may have somehow tainted the investigation.
You yourself, you appeared on Dateline, right?
I did.
In those media appearances.
Part of it, yes.
Now, your Dateline interview, that was after Miss Magbanua was arrested, right? If you remember.
Honestly, don't recall.
Attorney Kawas offered jurors a simple explanation for her client's misfortune.
Her major downfall is her taste in men. And at the end of this case, you are going to see that in men.
Magbanua had been both Sigfredo Garcia's common-law wife and Charlie Adelson's lover. That Adelson connection was why Magbanua was sitting at the defense table, according to her lawyer.
prosecutorial desperation. The prosecution's relentless obsession with arresting the Adelson family has led to this day, this moment, in this of a crime that she did not commit.
Both defendants were offered an opportunity to testify on their own behalf. Sigfredo Garcia passed, but in a bold, perhaps risky legal maneuver, Katie Magbanwa took the stand in her own defense. Right after she was sworn in, her lawyer cut to the chase.
Did you have anything to do with the murder of Dan Markell?
No, ma'am.
Podcaster Matthew Scher.
Maybe I think the inference maybe we're supposed to take from her testimony is that she was a pawn, an unwitting pawn in some way. But she keeps it up from her arrest through her testimony at the trial. She does not crack. It's not an instance where she breaks under pressure and says, "I know what happened."
The defense team stood by the essence of its case. The two people were strolling around South Florida free as birds.
Catherine was just a pawn in Charlie Adelson's plan to kill Dan Markell. And now the prosecution is trying to use Catherine as a pawn to get to Charlie Adelson.
The defendants would soon learn if the jury saw it that way. Coming up,
For Garcia, it could be up to and including the death penalty.
the stakes couldn't be higher for the defendants and Dan's family.
We really miss Dan's children. Our hearts are open to them. Our doors are open to them.
shot in his driveway in one of the most cold-blooded killings Tallahassee, Florida had ever seen. Now Judgment Day had arrived for the couple on trial for murder. Sigfredo Garcia for pulling the trigger, and Katie Magbanwa for setting it up. Upon conviction.
The Tallahassee Trap, an in-depth analysis of the murder of Dan Markell. Prologue, the shattering of a summer morning, the 18th of July, 2014. In Tallahassee, Florida, the summer air hangs thick and heavy, a familiar blanket of heat and humidity that settles over the manicured lawns and quiet tree-lined streets of the city's upscale neighborhoods. It is a city of politics and academia, a place where the rhythms of life are dictated by legislative sessions and university semesters. In the serene enclave of Benton Hills, life felt particularly insulated from the world's harsher realities. It was a place for prominent professors, successful attorneys, and families who had achieved a comfortable, sun-drenched version of the American dream. On this Friday morning, the day began with the unremarkable routines of a life well lived. Daniel Markell, a 1-year-old law professor at Florida State University, was a man in his prime. Brilliant, ambitious, and widely respected in the esoteric world of legal academia, he was a star. A graduate of Harvard College and Harvard Law School, he had built a formidable reputation, publishing influential papers, speaking at prestigious conferences, and engaging in spirited, often provocative, debate on his popular legal blog. To his friends, he was Danny, a connector of people, a man with a sharp intellect and a genuine interest in the lives of those around him. Most importantly, he was a devoted father to 2 young sons, the undisputed center of his universe. His morning followed a predictable, disciplined pattern. After dropping his boys off at preschool, he drove to the gym for his regular workout. The world was in order. His career was thriving. He was emerging from the emotional wreckage of a painfully acrimonious divorce and was, for the first time in years, feeling a renewed sense of optimism. He was dating again, finding happiness, and looking forward to the future. As he pulled his car into the garage of his home on Trescott Drive, the quiet of the morning was about to be irrevocably shattered. The sanctuary of his home, the very symbol of his hard-won stability, was about to become a crime scene. A neighbor, startled by a loud bang, would peer outside, catching a fleeting glimpse of a light-colored car, perhaps a silver or white Prius, backing hastily out of the driveway before speeding away. Another neighbor, drawn by the sound, would make a horrifying discovery. Inside the still-running car, Dan Markell was slumped over, his glasses broken, his head covered in blood. He had been shot twice at point-blank range. The call to 911 captured the disbelief of the moment. He's inside, the car is running, and he's got blood all over his head. The clinical, procedural response of law enforcement descended upon the tranquil street, yellow tape cordoning off a scene of unimaginable violence. But for the Tallahassee Police Department, and soon the FBI, this was not just another tragic, random act. The initial assessment was swift and chilling. This was not a robbery gone wrong or a home invasion. Nothing was taken. This was a targeted assassination. Dan Markell was the intended victim. The question was not just who had pulled the trigger, but why. Who would want to execute a beloved law professor in his own garage on a sunny Friday morning? The investigation would peel back the layers of Dan Markell's seemingly idyllic life, exposing a world of secrets, simmering rage, and profound familial dysfunction. It would lead detectives from the halls of academia to the seedy underbelly of Miami's criminal underworld, uncovering a bitter divorce so toxic it bred contempt, a family so enmeshed it blurred the lines between protection and conspiracy, and a plot so cold-blooded it defied comprehension. This was not a crime of passion committed in a moment of rage. This was a meticulously planned murder for hire, a contract killing that would stump investigators for years and reveal a chilling truth, that the deepest threats often come not from strangers, but from those who were once considered family. The Tallahassee trap had been set, and it had snapped shut with brutal finality. Chapter 1. The Anatomy of a Victim. To understand the motive for a murder, one must first understand the victim. Daniel Markell was not a simple man, and the portrait that emerged in the wake of his death was one of nuance and complexity. He was, by all accounts, a man of formidable intellect. His academic pedigree was impeccable, Cambridge, followed by Harvard for both his undergraduate and law degrees. He was a legal scholar of significant repute, specializing in criminal law and punishment theory. His work was not merely academic. He sought to engage in a broader public discourse. He founded a legal blog, Prof's Blog, which became a lively forum for debate among academics, students, and practitioners. Dan possessed an inherent confidence that some perceived as arrogance. He knew how bright he was, a friend would later recall. He thrived on intellectual combat, enjoying the parry and thrust of a well-reasoned argument. This very public engagement, however, came with its own set of risks. In the anonymous, often toxic world of internet comment sections, his strong opinions and moderation of the blog attracted vitriol. One commenter, enraged by what they perceived as censorship, wrote, "Bullies like this need to be made radioactive. All means necessary must be employed." When Dan expressed that he felt threatened, the commenter doubled down. "You're worried about your home and private life being a target? You've ruined their lives, you fool." Investigators would meticulously comb through these digital breadcrumbs. Was the killer a disgruntled former student who received a bad grade? An online antagonist whose virtual rage had spilled over into real-world violence? Or perhaps a colleague nursing a professional jealousy? Detectives interviewed students and faculty, analyzed emails, and chased down every lead emanating from his professional life. They found nothing. The threats on his blog, while menacing, appeared to be just that, the hollow bluster of cyberspace. The theories involving his work at Florida State University quickly fizzled out. Dan Markell, the academic, had no enemies who would resort to such extreme measures. To find a motive, investigators had to turn from his public persona to his private life, a realm that had recently been defined by turmoil, heartbreak, and a protracted legal war. The source of this conflict was his marriage to, and subsequent divorce from, Wendy Adelson. Wendy was, in many ways, Dan's intellectual equal. She, too, was a bright, accomplished lawyer, a graduate of Cambridge and the University of Miami School of Law, specializing in immigration and human rights law. She was an author, a clinical professor at FSU, and the mother of their 2 sons. They had met as young, ambitious academics and, for a time, appeared to be a golden couple. Friends recalled them as lovey-dovey, with pet names for each other, Danny Bear and Wendy Bear. They built a life together in Tallahassee, both securing positions at the FSU College of Law, a picture of shared professional and personal success. But beneath the surface, fractures were forming. According to Wendy, the marriage began to sour. She felt he didn't view her as an equal, that his career ambitions overshadowed her own. She was deeply unhappy not just with him, but with Tallahassee itself. A native of bustling, cosmopolitan South Florida, she felt isolated and constrained by the quieter, more provincial atmosphere of the state capital. Her family, the wealthy and tightly knit Adelson clan, was a 7-hour drive away in Broward County. This distance became a central point of contention. In September 2012, while Dan was away at a conference, Wendy made her move. She packed up her belongings, took the children, and left divorce papers on the marital bed. Dan would later refer to this as his Pearl Harbor moment, a devastating surprise attack that signaled the beginning of a long and bitter war. The divorce that followed was not merely unpleasant, it was a scorched earth legal campaign. As one of Dan's attorneys, Stephen Webster, described it, with 2 top-tier lawyers as litigants, the conflict was as petty as you could get, a relentless battle of wits waged through motions, filings, and accusations. They fought over assets and parenting time, but the primary battleground was geography. Wendy desperately wanted to relocate with the children to South Florida, to be back in the orbit of her powerful and supportive family. Dan was equally determined to keep his sons in Tallahassee, where he could remain a constant and active presence in their lives. The law sided with Dan. A judge denied Wendy's relocation request, ruling that the children's stability in Tallahassee with equal access to both parents was paramount. The decision was a crushing blow to Wendy, and by extension to her family. The divorce was finalized in 2013, but the legal skirmishes continued. They operated under a 50-over-50 custody agreement, but every detail was a point of friction. Dan, feeling that Wendy was infringing on his time, filed motions to enforce the schedule. Wendy found his demands unreasonable. The animosity was not just between the divorcing couple. It extended to their families. The Markells, based in Toronto, and the Adelsons, the dental dynasty from South Florida, had a relationship fraught with tension. Wendy's mother, Donna Adelson, was a particularly forceful presence. Emails uncovered during the investigation revealed her deep involvement in the divorce strategy, encouraging her daughter to fight dirty and show this F what will make him absolutely miserable. She wrote to Wendy, "The rest of your life, and consequently Dad's, mine, and yes, even Charlie's, will be affected by how well you can perform. You can be a good actress when you want to." Donna Adelson even orchestrated a plan to buy Dan off, offering him $1 million, split between her husband Harvey, and her son Charlie, in exchange for him allowing the children to move. Dan refused. His connection to his sons was not for sale. The conflict escalated. Dan grew so concerned about Donna's negative influence that he filed a motion 3 months before his murder seeking to prevent her from having unsupervised time with his children, alleging she had made derogatory remarks about him in front of them. He didn't want his mother-in-law poisoning his sons against him. By the summer of 2014, things were about to come to a head. Despite the ongoing legal battles, both Dan and Wendy had begun to move on personally. Both were in new relationships. Dan, in particular, seemed to be rediscovering happiness, but the custody issue remained a festering wound. Dan had filed another motion, and a new hearing was scheduled. His lawyer described the situation as about to go off the Richter scale. Dan was killed before that hearing could ever take place. With his death, the most significant obstacle to Wendy and the children relocating to South Florida was eliminated. The police, having exhausted all avenues related to his professional life, now had a clear and compelling motive. The theories of angry students and internet trolls faded into the background, replaced by the stark reality of a divorce so venomous that it may have culminated in murder. The question for investigators was no longer if the divorce was the motive, but who among the aggrieved parties had crossed the line from bitter resentment to calculated homicide. Chapter 2. The Interview and the Inner Circle. Within hours of the shooting, as Dan Markel fought for his life in a Tallahassee hospital, investigators brought his ex-wife, Wendy Adelson, in for an interview. The video of that lengthy interrogation would become a cornerstone of the investigation, a fascinating study in grief, composure, and statements that were, in hindsight, eerily prescient. Wendy, herself a lawyer, waived her right to an attorney and spoke to the detective for hours. Her demeanor was a complex mix of emotions. She was distraught, crying, and seemingly lost in a fog of shock and confusion. She provided a solid alibi for the time of the murder. She had been at her home, 5 miles away from Dan's, where a repairman was fixing her television. Her alibi would be checked and confirmed. Wendy Adelson did not pull the trigger. But as the interview progressed, her words began to sketch the outlines of a much darker picture. When asked who might have a grudge against her ex-husband, she painted a picture of a man who, while well-meaning, would sometimes rub people the wrong way. She spoke at length about their bitter divorce, confirming the immense animosity that had defined their separation. Then came a statement that made the investigators pause. Through her tears, she said, "His parents are going to be devastated. They're going to think I did it." It was a startlingly specific fear, an unprompted leap to a conclusion that most people, in a state of shock, would not make. Was it the genuine anxiety of someone who knew how much she was despised by her former in-laws? Or was it a flicker of guilty knowledge? The detective, sensing an opening, pushed deeper, asking if anyone in her life might have done this. Wendy's response was even more revealing. "Danny didn't treat me very well," she began, "and I'm so scared that maybe someone did this. Not because they hate Danny, but because they thought this was good somehow." This was the first articulation of a theory that would come to dominate the case, that the murder was not an act of hatred against Dan, but a misguided act of love or loyalty toward her. It was a chilling proposition. Who in her life loved her so much that they would commit murder on her behalf? The conversation naturally turned to her family. She described her parents in Coral Springs and her close relationship with her older brother, Charlie Adelson, a successful periodontist in Fort Lauderdale. She made another comment that would later seem heavily weighted with significance. "My parents have more reason to dislike Danny than almost anyone else." Investigators also explored her romantic life post-divorce. She had been dating a fellow FSU professor, Jeffrey Lacasse. Their relationship had recently become strained. Wendy described him as jealous and controlling, and she had sent him an email just days before the murder asking for a break. She also mentioned that he drove a silver-colored car. Given the neighbor's description of a light-colored car fleeing the scene, Lacasse immediately became a person of interest. Detectives brought him in for questioning 3 days later. Lacasse was candid and emotional. He admitted he was still in love with Wendy and was heartbroken by their breakup. He also made no secret of his intense dislike for Dan Markel, whom he saw as the source of Wendy's suffering. "I probably said 100 times in public that I'd like to kick his ass," he told them. He was, on the surface, a perfect suspect. The jilted lover with a grudge against his girlfriend's ex-husband. But Jeff Lacasse, like Wendy, had a rock-solid alibi. Credit card receipts and witness accounts placed him far from the crime scene at the time of the murder. He was quickly cleared. However, his interview provided investigators with a bombshell. He relayed a conversation he'd had with Wendy that she had not mentioned to the police. Wendy had told him that her brother, Charlie, had looked into the cost of solving her problem. Charlie had made a joke that hiring a hitman would cost about $15,000, but that buying her a television as a divorce present would be cheaper. This was the second time the idea of a hitman had surfaced, and it was now directly linked to a specific member of Wendy's family, her brother, Charlie. The joke was no longer funny. It was a sinister piece of a puzzle that was slowly taking shape. The focus of the investigation began to shift decisively from Tallahassee southward to the wealthy, sun-drenched world of the Adelson family. Charlie Adelson was a character straight out of a Miami crime novel. He was a successful, flashy dentist who cultivated an image of a charismatic playboy. He drove expensive sports cars with a vanity license plate that read Maestro. His home featured a backyard grotto pool. He was the confident, protective older brother, deeply enmeshed in his sister's life and her protracted divorce battle. Wendy had described their bond as very close. The investigators now had a powerful, if circumstantial, theory. The Adelson family, frustrated by the legal system's refusal to allow Wendy to relocate and motivated by a desire to fix her unhappiness, had decided to take matters into their own hands. The $1 million offer to Dan had failed. Perhaps they had moved on to a more permanent and far cheaper solution. The joke about the hitman now seemed like a potential trial balloon, a way of testing the waters, or, more chillingly, a direct statement of intent. But a theory, no matter how compelling, is not evidence. There was nothing directly connecting Charlie Adelson or his parents to the crime scene in Tallahassee. They were 500 miles away, insulated by wealth and status. To bridge that gap, detectives needed to find the people who had actually carried out the murder. The key, they believed, was the light-colored car. Their best and only physical lead from the crime scene was the neighbor's fleeting glimpse of a silver or white Prius. Finding that car and the people inside it became the singular obsession of the investigation. Chapter 3: The Ghost Car and the Digital Trail. For months, the investigation into Dan Markel's murder seemed to be at a standstill. The leads from his personal and professional life had pointed toward a compelling motive rooted in his divorce, but there was no physical evidence, no murder weapon, and no direct link to a suspect. The case was growing cold. The only tangible clue was the ghost of a car, a silver Prius, seen for a split second as it fled the scene. The Tallahassee Police Department, aided by the FBI, launched a painstaking and methodical search for this vehicle. They began by canvassing Dan's neighborhood for surveillance cameras, hoping a private system had captured an image of the car. They found nothing. Undeterred, they widened their scope, retracing Dan's final movements on the morning of his death. The first breakthrough came from the security cameras at the gym he visited. At 9:13 a.m., video captured Dan arriving. A short time later, a silver Prius is seen entering the same parking lot. The footage shows the Prius moving around, repositioning itself as if to get a better vantage point of the exit. At 10:34 a.m., Dan leaves the gym. 20 seconds later, the Prius follows. As an investigator would later state, at that point, he is being hunted. The gym footage was a forensic home run. It confirmed that the Prius was not a random vehicle but was actively tailing the victim. However, the video quality was too poor to make out a license plate or a clear image of the occupants. The hunt was on, but the hunters remained anonymous. The next crucial piece of evidence came from an inspired piece of police work. An officer had the idea to check the surveillance cameras installed on the city's public buses. It was a long shot, but they collected and reviewed hours of footage from buses that had routes near Dan's neighborhood around the time of the murder. And there it was. At 10:47 a.m., a bus camera captured the same silver Prius on the southbound road Dan took home. Another bus camera caught the car again moments after the shooting, this time heading away from the crime scene. The footage was clear enough for investigators to observe active movement in the passenger seat, suggesting two people were in the car. Forensic video analysts painstakingly enhanced the images. While they still couldn't read the license plate, they were able to determine the car's specific model year, 2006 to 2009, and its exact color, a distinctive shade Toyota calls silver pine mica. They now had a precise description of the getaway vehicle, but this created a new problem. There were hundreds of Priuses of that make, model, and color registered in the state of Florida. The investigation threatened to drown in a sea of data. Then came the clue that would crack the case wide open. Upon careful re-examination of the bus footage, analysts spotted a small object on the Prius's windshield, a Florida SunPass transponder, a device used for automatic toll payments. This was the key. Investigators pivoted their search, cross-referencing registered silver pine mica Priuses with SunPass toll data. They were looking for a car that had traveled from South Florida to Tallahassee just before the murder and returned immediately after. After months of sifting through records, they found a match. A SunPass transponder, assigned to a silver pine mica Prius, had registered a toll on I-75, heading north towards Tallahassee on the afternoon of July 17th, the day before Dan was killed. The same transponder pinged a toll booth heading south, away from Tallahassee, on the evening of July 18th, the day he died. The timeline was a perfect fit. The SunPass account was registered to a small car rental agency in North Miami. Investigators pulled the rental agreement for that specific Prius. The car had been rented by a man named Luis Rivera. The paperwork listed his real cell phone number and address. It also listed a second phone number under the name Brother. Using phone records and further investigation, they linked that second number to a man named Sigfredo Garcia. Both names were familiar to law enforcement. Luis Rivera was a high-ranking member of the notorious Latin King street gang. Sigfredo Garcia had a criminal record for robbery and burglary. These were not angry academics or jilted lovers. These were hardened criminals from the Miami underworld. With names and phone numbers, the digital trail began to light up. Detectives obtained cell tower data that placed both Rivera and Garcia in Tallahassee on the day of the murder. They tracked their financial transactions and discovered an ATM withdrawal made in Pembroke Pines, just outside Miami, on the date of the homicide. The bank's security camera provided the final, irrefutable piece of evidence. The footage clearly showed the silver pine mica Prius pulling up to the ATM, Luis Rivera was in the driver's seat, and Sigfredo Garcia was in the passenger seat. It had taken investigators nearly 2 years of relentless, meticulous work, but they had followed the ghost car from a fleeting glimpse on a quiet Tallahassee street all the way to 2 prime suspects in Miami. In May 2016, Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera were arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of Dan Markel. The arrests made headlines, but for everyone close to the case, it was clear this was not the end of the story. Garcia and Rivera had no connection to Dan Markel. They had no personal motive to drive 500 miles to execute a man they had never met. As the Tallahassee police chief stated publicly, this was obviously a murder for hire. The question that now hung over the case was explosive. Who hired them? The digital trail had led to the hitmen. Now, investigators had to follow the money trail to find the mastermind. Chapter 4. The Nexus. Catherine Magbanua. With Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera in custody, investigators began to dig into their lives, looking for the missing link, the person who connected these Miami street criminals to the world of academia and family law in Tallahassee. They soon discovered that both men, in the weeks and months following Dan Markel's murder, had suddenly come into a significant amount of cash. They went on spending sprees, buying new cars and motorcycles, with Garcia proudly posting photos of his new acquisitions on social media. This was not the behavior of men who had just committed a murder for personal reasons. It was the behavior of men who had just been paid for a job well done. The critical connection, the nexus between the world of the Adelsons and the world of the hitmen, turned out to be a woman, Catherine Katie Magbanua. Magbanua's name emerged as investigators scrutinized Sigfredo Garcia's life. She was the mother of his 2 children, his on-again, off-again partner, but she was much more than that. A review of her personal and financial life revealed a startling and damning set of connections. Catherine Magbanua had also been romantically involved with Charlie Adelson. She was the bridge. She was intimately linked to both the suspected mastermind and one of the accused killers. This discovery transformed the case, providing a direct personal line between the Adelson family and the men in the Prius. Investigators launched a deep dive into Magbanua's finances and found a pattern that was impossible to ignore. A woman who worked jobs as a bartender and promoter at clubs with a modest income at best suddenly had tens of thousands of dollars flowing through her bank accounts in the year after the murder. Her lifestyle had dramatically improved. More damningly, they found direct financial ties to the Adelsons. Magbanua was receiving regular paychecks from the Adelson Institute, the family's dental practice. The checks were signed by Donna Adelson. When investigators interviewed employees at the Institute, no one could recall ever seeing Catherine Magbanua working there. No one knew what she did to earn this money. It appeared to be a no-show job, a classic method for funneling illicit payments. The generosity extended beyond paychecks. Charlie Adelson had given Magbanua a Lexus that was previously registered to his father, Harvey. He had also, according to investigators, paid for half of her breast augmentation surgery. He was lavishing her with gifts and money. But was it out of affection, or was it payment for a service rendered? The prosecution's theory was now fully formed. Charlie Adelson, motivated by his sister's desperate unhappiness and the family's intense desire to have the children in South Florida, decided to eliminate Dan Markel. He used his girlfriend, Catherine Magbanua, as the go-between. Magbanua, in turn, recruited the father of her children, Sigfredo Garcia, to carry out the hit. Garcia enlisted his associate, Luis Rivera, to help. The payment, prosecutors alleged, flowed from the Adelsons through Magbanua to the killers. It was a tidy, compelling theory, but it was still circumstantial. There were no recordings of Charlie asking Katie to arrange a murder, no bank transfers explicitly labeled for hitman. To get the direct evidence they needed, investigators decided to force the conspirators' hands. They devised an undercover sting operation designed to rattle the Adelson family and trigger a cascade of incriminating conversations. In April 2016, an undercover FBI agent, posing as an affiliate of Luis Rivera, approached Donna Adelson on a public street in Miami. He handed her a piece of paper. On it was a news article about the Markel murder, with the number $5,000 and a phone number written on it. The agent told her that while she was taking care of Katie and Garcia, she wasn't taking care of his boy, implying Rivera. It was a classic blackmail setup designed to see how she would react. The sting worked perfectly. Donna Adelson was clearly rattled, and her first call was to her son, Charlie. The FBI was listening in. The conversation that followed and the series of calls between Charlie and Katie over the next few days were a masterclass in coded language and panicked subtext. Donna told Charlie that some paperwork had been hand-delivered to her. Charlie, immediately understanding the gravity, asked, "Does it involve me or other people?" and told her, "So you probably have a general idea what I'm talking about." They never mentioned the murder, Dan Markel, or the hitman by name, but the context was undeniable. Charlie then called Catherine Magbanua. His voice was laced with urgency. He explained that someone had approached his mother, demanding money in reference to her son and his ex-girlfriend. They spoke in vague terms about properties and business, but the underlying fear was palpable. In a later in-person conversation at a noisy restaurant, surveilled by law enforcement, Charlie allegedly told Katie that if the blackmailer was real, they would have to deal with him permanently. According to the probable cause affidavit, he told her, "You better kill him because he's going to be a big problem. If you can't do it, I'll have someone else do it." The wiretaps did not produce a confession, a smoking gun, but they provided powerful evidence of a shared guilty conscience. Their panicked, coded reactions to the FBI sting were not those of innocent people confused by a random extortion attempt. They were the reactions of co-conspirators who knew their carefully constructed wall of silence was beginning to crumble. With this evidence in hand, prosecutors felt they had enough to move forward. In October 2016, Catherine Magbanua was arrested and charged, alongside Sigfredo Garcia, with the first-degree murder of Dan Markel. The stage was set for a trial that would finally bring the sprawling conspiracy into a courtroom. Before that could happen, however, there was one more dramatic twist. Luis Rivera, the Latin Kings gang member who drove the Prius, decided to flip. Facing the possibility of the death penalty, he cut a deal. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and agreed to tell the prosecution everything he knew. The driver of the getaway car was now the state's star witness, ready to take the stand and expose the entire plot from the inside. Chapter 5. The Trial and the Testimonies. In the fall of 2019, more than 5 years after Dan Markel was killed, the trial of Sigfredo Garcia and Catherine Magbanua began in a Tallahassee courtroom. It was the culmination of a massive, multi-agency investigation, and the prosecution, led by Georgia Kappelman, was ready to lay out its complex conspiracy case for the jury. The state's narrative was clear. This was a murder for hire, orchestrated and financed by the Adelson family, with Catherine Magbanua acting as the crucial intermediary and Sigfredo Garcia as the triggerman. Charlie Adelson was named as an unindicted co-conspirator, a specter who loomed over the entire proceeding, even though he was not on trial. The prosecution's star witness was Luis Rivera. On the stand, he provided a chilling, first-hand account of the murder plot. He told the jury that Garcia had recruited him for what he initially thought was a robbery. It was only on the drive to Tallahassee that Garcia revealed the true nature of the job. They were there to kill someone for a payout of $100,000, of which Rivera was promised a share. Rivera detailed 2 separate trips they made from Miami to Tallahassee. The first, in June 2014, was a reconnaissance mission. They were supposed to commit the murder then, but were unable to locate Markel. They returned 6 weeks later, in July, to finish the job. He described stalking Dan from his home to the preschool, then to the gym, and finally back to his house. He recounted the final moments with cold precision. How he pulled the Prius up to the garage, how Garcia jumped out, fired 2 shots into Dan's car, and then got back in as they sped away. He also provided crucial testimony about the payment. He said that after the murder, Garcia and Catherine Magbanua delivered his share of the money, about $35,000, to him in cash. He described the money as being in stapled stacks of $100 bills. This detail was corroborated by one of Charlie Adelson's ex-girlfriends, June Umchinda, who testified that she had seen similarly stapled stacks of cash at Charlie's house, a peculiar detail she had even joked with him about. The defense attorneys for Garcia and Magbanua launched a ferocious attack on Rivera's credibility. They portrayed him as a career criminal, a lying snitch who was willing to say anything prosecutors wanted to hear in order to save himself from the death penalty. They argued that Rivera, not Garcia, was the shooter, and that his story was a fabrication designed to pin the blame on others. The prosecution then called a series of witnesses to build its circumstantial case against Magbanua and, by extension, the Adelsons. They presented her bank records, showing the unexplained influx of cash. They put on banking experts and law enforcement officials who detailed the wiretapped calls from the FBI sting, highlighting the defendant's panicked, coded language. One of the most anticipated witnesses was Wendy Adelson. Granted immunity for her testimony, her statements could not be used against her. On the stand, she was composed and measured, a stark contrast to her emotional state during her initial police interview. She flatly denied any involvement in a plot to kill her ex-husband. When asked about her brother's joke about hiring a hitman, she downplayed its significance, saying Charlie often made inappropriate jokes that weren't funny. She acknowledged knowing Catherine Magbanua as her brother's girlfriend, but denied any deeper connection. Under cross-examination, she remained unflappable, a polished attorney navigating a treacherous legal landscape. "Do you know who killed Dan Markel?" a lawyer asked. "No," she replied. The defense for Catherine Magbanua argued that she was merely a pawn, a single mother guilty of nothing more than having terrible taste in men. Her lawyers claimed she was caught between her volatile ex, Sigfredo Garcia, and her wealthy, manipulative boyfriend, Charlie Adelson. They argued that the prosecution, obsessed with arresting the Adelsons but lacking the evidence to do so, was using her as a scapegoat. In a risky and dramatic move, Catherine Magbanua took the stand in her own defense. She denied any and all involvement in the murder plot. She claimed the extra cash in her accounts came from her work as a bottle girl at high-end clubs, where she could make over $1,000 a night in tips. She denied ever acting as a conduit for money between Charlie Adelson and the killers. However, under questioning from the prosecutor, her testimony took a stunning turn. When asked if she believed Charlie Adelson was involved in the murder, she replied, "Based on everything you've seen, do you think Charlie was involved in this?" "Yes," she said. It was a bombshell moment. While maintaining her own innocence, she pointed the finger directly at her former lover, suggesting he had used her and lied to her. She was, in her telling, another victim of Charlie Adelson's machinations. After 11 days of testimony, the case went to the jury. The deliberations were tense. After 10 hours, they returned with a verdict for only one of the defendants. They found Sigfredo Garcia guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy. He would later be sentenced to life in prison. But for Catherine Magbanua, the jury was deadlocked. They could not reach a unanimous decision. The judge declared a mistrial. The nexus, the critical link in the conspiracy, had, for the moment, slipped through the prosecution's grasp. Epilogue: the lingering question of justice. The conviction of Sigfredo Garcia and the guilty plea of Luis Rivera brought a measure of accountability for the murder of Dan Markel. Two of the individuals directly responsible for his death were behind bars. Catherine Magbanua would face a retrial, and in May 2022, a new jury would find her guilty on all counts, sentencing her to life in prison, plus 2 consecutive 30-year sentences. The bridge between the two worlds was finally held responsible. Yet, for the Markel family and many observers of the case, a profound sense of injustice lingered. The soldiers had been convicted, but the generals, the alleged masterminds who financed and ordered the execution, remained free. To date, no member of the Adelson family, Wendy, Charlie, Donna, or Harvey, has been charged with any crime related to the murder. They have consistently and vehemently denied any involvement through their attorneys, dismissing the prosecution's theory as a fanciful fiction. In the years following the murder, the erasure of Dan Markel's legacy continued. Wendy Adelson legally changed her son's last names from Markel to Adelson, citing a desire to protect them from media attention and for security reasons. The Markel family, once an active part of their grandsons' lives, became completely estranged from them. They lost not only their son, but also their connection to his children, a second, enduring tragedy born from the first. The case of Dan Markel's murder is a chilling testament to the destructive power of familial enmeshment and the dark lengths to which people will go to get what they want. It is a story where the boundaries of love, loyalty, and protection became so warped that a bitter divorce and a custody dispute escalated into a cold-blooded, interstate murder-for-hire plot. The lingering question is whether the whole truth will ever be exposed in a court of law. The evidence presented at trial painted a powerful circumstantial picture of the Adelson family's involvement. but a conviction requires proof beyond a reasonable doubt. For now, the architects of the Tallahassee trap remain in the shadows, leaving Dan Markel's loved ones to grapple with an incomplete justice, forever haunted by the knowledge that the people who wanted him dead may have gotten away with murder. The truth, as one investigator noted, has a way of coming out. For the Markel family, the wait continues. The Tallahassee Trap, a story of love, betrayal, and murder for hire. Prologue. The last ordinary morning. The air on the morning of the 18th of July 2014 was already thick with promise, the promise of another sweltering North Florida day. In Tallahassee, a city built on the twin pillars of state politics and higher education, the summer rhythm was slow and predictable. The legislative frenzy had long since subsided, and the university town had settled into a languid pace, the streets quieter without the throngs of students. In the serene, moneyed enclave of Benton Hills, with its sprawling live oaks dripping with Spanish moss and its impeccably manicured lawns, the silence was almost sacred. This was a neighborhood insulated from the coarse and brutal realities of the world, a curated bubble of success where the most pressing concerns were tenure tracks, property values, and the start of the college football season. It was a place where violence was an abstract concept, a headline from a distant city, never a threat that could breach the sanctity of one's own driveway. Inside this bubble lived Daniel Markel, a man who, at 41, was the living embodiment of the neighborhood's aspirational ideal. He was more than just a law professor at Florida State University. He was a legal supernova. His CV read like a dream of academic achievement. Cambridge, followed by a sweep of Harvard for both his undergraduate and law degrees. In the rarefied air of legal scholarship, his name carried weight. He published prodigiously, his theories on crime and punishment sparking debate in hallowed halls across the country. He was a sought-after speaker, a charismatic intellectual who could command a room with his sharp wit and boundless confidence. His blog, a pioneering space for legal discourse, was a testament to his desire to connect, to argue, to be at the very center of the conversation. To his friends, he was simply Danny, a man whose brilliance was matched only by his loyalty. He was a collector of people, a social nucleus who thrived on bringing his disparate circles of friends together. But above all the accolades, the publications, and the intellectual jousting, one role defined him more than any other: father. His two young sons were the anchors of his existence, the undisputed core of his world. Every decision, every battle, every joy was filtered through the prism of his love for them. That Friday morning began as 1,000 others had a symphony of domestic routine. The familiar controlled chaos of getting the boys ready, the drive to preschool, the quick hugs and promises of an afternoon adventure. After dropping them off, he pointed his car toward the gym. Life, for the first time in a long, agonizing while, felt like it was finally realigning itself. The brutal, soul-crushing war of his divorce from Wendy Adelson was in the rearview mirror, or so he believed. The emotional shrapnel was still there, of course, but the open wounds were beginning to scar over. He was dating again. A new relationship infusing his life with a lightness he had forgotten was possible. He was emerging from the darkness, his eyes readjusting to the light. The future, once a terrifying void, was beginning to look bright again. He finished his workout, the familiar burn of exertion, a welcome affirmation of life and strength. He drove home, the mundane journey down familiar streets, a path he could have navigated in his sleep. He turned onto Trescott Drive, pulling into his own garage, a space of personal sanctuary. In that final, ordinary moment, perhaps reaching for his gym bag, perhaps thinking about the work waiting on his desk, or the weekend, with his son stretching before him the world as he knew it ceased to exist. Outside, the neighborhood's placid morning was torn apart by two sharp, concussive cracks. The sound, alien and violent, hung in the humid air for a moment before dissipating. A neighbor, startled from their coffee, peered out a window. They saw a flash of movement. A light-colored car, maybe silver, maybe white, a Prius perhaps, backing out of the Markel driveway with a guilty haste, its tires squealing as it sped away, a ghost vanishing into the sunlight. Another neighbor, drawn by the unnatural sound, cautiously approached. What they found was a scene of pure, incomprehensible horror. The garage door was open, an invitation into a nightmare. Inside, Dan Markel's car was still running, its engine a low, indifferent hum. He was slumped in the driver's seat, his glasses shattered, his face a mask of blood. He had been shot twice, at point-blank range, an execution in the heart of his own home. The 911 call was a frantic cascade of shock and disbelief. "He's inside. The car is running, and he's got blood all over his head." The words tumbled out, trying to make sense of the senseless. Within minutes, the sacred quiet of Benton Hills was shattered by the wail of sirens. Yellow police tape, a garish slash of color against the serene green lawns, cordoned off the scene. The clinical, methodical machinery of a homicide investigation began to turn. For the Tallahassee Police Department, and soon the FBI, one thing was immediately, chillingly clear. This was no robbery gone wrong. Dan's wallet was untouched, his car unmolested. This was not a crime of opportunity. This was personal. This was precise. This was a targeted assassination. The question that echoed through the halls of the police department was not simply who had pulled the trigger. It was a question that would unravel a sprawling, years-long saga of familial dysfunction, bottomless wealth, and chilling malice. The question was why. Why would anyone want a brilliant law professor, a beloved father, executed in such a brutal and intimate fashion? The search for that answer would peel back the polished veneer of Dan Markel's life, exposing a dark underbelly of seething resentment and manipulation. It would lead detectives on a winding path from the stately campus of FSU to the sun-bleached, neon-drenched streets of South Florida, from the bitter confines of a family law court to the treacherous depths of the Miami criminal underworld. It was a story about a divorce so toxic it became a blood feud, and a family so pathologically enmeshed that they saw murder as just another problem to be solved, another expense to be paid. A trap had been meticulously designed and baited, half a state away. On this beautiful July morning, it had snapped shut with brutal, bloody finality. Chapter 1: The Anatomy of a Victim and the Poison of a Feud. To comprehend the depravity of the crime, one must first dissect the life of the man it extinguished. Daniel Markel was a man forged in the crucible of elite institutions and intellectual rigor. He was a product of Cambridge and Harvard, a walking, talking embodiment of academic prestige. His mind was his greatest asset, a finely tuned engine of logic and argument. He didn't just study the law. He wrestled with it, poked at its foundations, and challenged its conventions in the public square of his widely read blog, Prof's Blog. It was a space he curated for spirited, sometimes bare-knuckled debate. He relished the fight, the intellectual crossfire. A friend would later say with a mixture of admiration and candor, he knew how bright he was. This confidence, this intellectual certainty, could be magnetic to some and grating to others. It was the natural byproduct of a life spent being the smartest person in almost every room. This public-facing intellectual combat, however, generated its own kind of heat. In the lawless digital frontiers of internet comment sections, his moderation of the blog and his own sharp-elbowed arguments drew fire. Trolls and antagonists were an occupational hazard. Most were forgettable, their anger a fleeting digital vapor, but some were more venomous. One particular commenter, infuriated by a perceived slight, unleashed a torrent of rage that, in retrospect, seemed prophetic in its menace. "Bullies like this need to be made radioactive," the anonymous voice typed. "All means necessary must be employed." When Dan, a man who dealt in words, responded that he felt genuinely threatened, the antagonist scoffed at his fear, typing a chilling retort. "You're worried about your home and private life being a target? You've ruined their lives, you fool." Was this the killer? A digital phantom who had crawled out of the screen and into the real world? Homicide detectives are trained to start with the obvious, to follow the threads of recent conflict. They descended on the FSU campus, interviewing students, deans, and fellow faculty. They pored over years of emails, searching for a single discordant note, a threat from a failing student, a vendetta from a spurned colleague, a professional rivalry that had curdled into something monstrous. They chased down the digital breadcrumbs, following the trail of online vitriol. Every path led to a dead end. The menacing comments, they concluded, were the hollow threats of the impotently enraged. The campus, his professional sanctuary, held no answers. Dan Markel, the academic, had no enemies with the capacity or the will for such ultimate violence. To find the genesis of this hatred, investigators had to turn away from the public man and delve deep into the wreckage of his private life. For the last few years, Dan Markel's world had been defined not by legal theory, but by a legal war, a brutal, grinding conflict with the woman he had once loved, Wendy Adelson. On paper, they were the perfect match, a power couple of the legal world. Wendy was his peer in every sense, whip-smart, ambitious, and accomplished. A graduate of Cambridge and the University of Miami School of Law, she had carved out her own niche in immigration and human rights law. She was an author, a respected professor, and most importantly, the mother of his sons. Their early years were, by all accounts, idyllic. Friends saw a couple deeply in love. Two intellectual dynamos who called each other Danny Bear and Wendy Bear. They were a unit, a partnership building, a life of shared purpose and success in the quiet groves of academe. But beneath the placid surface of their shared life, a chasm was forming. According to Wendy, the partnership began to feel like a hierarchy. She felt eclipsed by his soaring career, relegated to a supporting role she had never auditioned for. More than that, she felt trapped not just in the marriage, but in Tallahassee itself. She was a daughter of South Florida, a creature of its vibrant, sun-drenched, multicultural energy. Her family, the Adelsons, were pillars of their community in Broward County, a wealthy and powerful dental dynasty. Wendy was deeply connected to them, particularly to her mother, Donna, and her older brother, Charlie. The 7-hour drive up the spine of Florida felt like an unbridgeable gulf, an exile. Tallahassee, to her, was a provincial backwater, a cage. In September 2012, while Dan was out of town, solidifying his academic stardom at a conference, Wendy decided to break out of that cage. She executed her departure with the ruthless precision of a military operation. She packed her things, took the children, and in a final, devastating gesture, left the divorce papers on their bed. For Dan, it was an act of shocking betrayal, a sneak attack on the very foundations of his life. He would forever call it his Pearl Harbor moment. What followed was not a divorce. It was a war of attrition. Stephen Webster, one of Dan's attorneys, would later struggle to describe the sheer venom of the proceedings. With two brilliant legal minds dedicated to mutual destruction, the litigation descended into a maelstrom of pettiness. It was a battle of wits, Webster said, but it was a battle fought with the dirtiest of tactics. They fought over money, over schedules, over every conceivable detail. But the true, existential battle was over geography. Wendy's single, overarching goal was to take the children and move back to South Florida, to be absorbed back into the powerful protective orbit of the Adelson clan. Dan's goal was just as absolute, to keep his sons in Tallahassee, where he could be the father he was determined to be present, involved, and integral to their daily lives. The family court system, designed to adjudicate such disputes, became their battlefield. And on the crucial issue of relocation, the law came down on Dan's side. A judge, weighing the evidence, denied Wendy's request, affirming that the children's best interests were served by remaining in a stable environment with equal access to both parents. For Wendy, and for the Adelsons, the ruling was not just a legal setback, it was an intolerable affront. The divorce was finalized, but the peace was illusory. The animosity only deepened, metastasizing beyond the couple. The Adelson family, led by its formidable matriarch, Donna, saw Dan not as a co-parent but as an obstacle, an impediment to their daughter's happiness and their family's cohesion. Donna's involvement was not passive. Emails unearthed by investigators revealed her as a central strategist in the war against her former son-in-law. She urged Wendy to fight dirty, to weaponize every tool at her disposal. "Let's show this F what will make him absolutely miserable," she wrote in one stunningly frank message. In another, she reminded her daughter of the stakes. "The rest of your life, and consequently Dad's, mine, and yes, even Charlie's, will be affected by how well you can perform." When legal maneuvering failed, they resorted to financial muscle. Donna concocted a plan to offer Dan $1 million a sum split between herself, her husband Harvey, and her son Charlie in exchange for his surrender. Let the children go, and he would be a rich man. But Dan's love for his sons was not a commodity to be traded. He refused. His defiance only hardened their resolve. The conflict grew so toxic that just 3 months before his death, Dan filed a legal motion to prevent Donna Adelson from spending unsupervised time with his own children. He feared she was systematically poisoning them against him, turning his own sons into weapons in their relentless campaign. By the summer of 2014, the Cold War was about to turn hot. A new hearing was on the court docket. Dan was pushing for more enforcement of the custody agreement. The tensions were reaching a breaking point. His lawyer feared the situation was about to go off the Richter scale. He was right. But the explosion would not happen in a courtroom. It would happen in a suburban garage with 2 deafening gunshots. Dan was killed before the hearing. With his death, the single greatest impediment to Wendy Adelson's desires, and by extension her family's, was brutally and permanently removed. For investigators, the convoluted theories of online trolls and disgruntled students evaporated like mist in the Florida Sunday. They were left with the stark, chilling clarity of a motive as old as humanity itself, a venomous hatred born from a broken marriage, amplified by a pathologically protective family who had the means, the will, and the utter lack of conscience to see a man not as a father, but as a problem to be erased. The question was no longer if the divorce had led to his murder, but which member of the aggrieved clan had made the final, fatal decision to cross the line from bitter resentment to cold-blooded, calculated homicide. Chapter 2. The widow's tears and the brother's joke. The interrogation room was a sterile, soulless box, painted in a nondescript shade of government beige. The air was cold, recycled, and smelled faintly of antiseptic and anxiety. In this claustrophobic space, just hours after her ex-husband had been gunned down, Wendy Adelson sat across from a homicide detective. The video recording of this interview, a marathon session of grief and calculation, would become one of the most scrutinized pieces of evidence in the sprawling investigation. It was a performance, but of what? A grieving widow? Or a woman with a terrible secret? Wendy, a seasoned attorney, was well aware of her rights, yet she waived them, agreeing to speak without a lawyer present. Her demeanor was a carefully calibrated whirlwind of emotion. She wept. She wrung her hands. She seemed to be adrift in a sea of shock, her words punctuated by gasps and moments of stunned silence. She provided the detective with an immediate, verifiable alibi. At the time of the shooting, she was at her home across town, overseeing a TV repairman. The alibi was clean, airtight. She had been miles away. Wendy Adelson had not held the gun. But as the hours wore on, her words, not her actions, began to ensnare her. The detective gently probed, asking the standard question, who might have wanted to harm Dan? Wendy's answer was telling. She described Dan as a man who would sometimes rub people the wrong way, a subtle but significant piece of character assassination. She spoke of their divorce not just as a painful split, but as a crucible of animosity, laying the groundwork of motive for anyone who might be listening. Then, in a moment that would echo through the entire investigation, she looked at the detective, her eyes welling with tears, and offered an unprompted, eerily specific fear. His parents are going to be devastated, she sobbed. They're going to think I did it. It was a breathtaking leap of logic. Why, in the initial throes of shock, would her mind immediately go to being a suspect? Was it the rational fear of someone who knew how much she was loathed by her former in-laws? Or was it the involuntary reflex of a guilty conscience, a flicker of the truth escaping through a crack in her carefully constructed facade? The detective, a veteran of these delicate conversations, saw the opening. He pushed, gently. Could anyone in her life have done this? Wendy's response was a masterpiece of misdirection and implication. Danny didn't treat me very well, she began, artfully shifting the focus from the victim to his alleged failings. And I'm so scared that maybe someone did this, not because they hate Danny, but because they thought this was good somehow. This was it. The articulation of the central theory of the case, offered up not by law enforcement, but by the victim's ex-wife. She was planting a seed, suggesting that the murder was not an act of vengeance against Dan, but a twisted act of chivalry for her. It was a chilling and audacious gambit. The immediate question it raised was as obvious as it was terrifying. Who in Wendy Adelson's life loved her so much, was so devoted to her happiness, that they would commit murder to achieve it? The conversation inevitably drifted south, to her family in Coral Springs. She spoke of her parents, and then of her older brother, the charismatic periodontist, Charlie Adelson. She described their bond as exceptionally close. Then she dropped another loaded statement, almost as an aside. "My parents have more reason to dislike Danny than almost anyone else." She was drawing a map for the investigators, and all roads led directly to her own family. The detectives, however, had to follow procedure. They explored other avenues, including Wendy's romantic life. She told them about her recent boyfriend, Jeff Lacasse, a fellow professor at FSU. She painted him as jealous and possessive, and mentioned she had just broken things off with him via email. Crucially, she noted he drove a silver-colored car. With the neighbor's eyewitness account of a light-colored car fleeing the scene, Jeff Lacasse was instantly elevated to the top of the suspect list. 3 days later, Lacasse found himself in the same beige, airless room. He was the antithesis of Wendy's composed grief. He was raw, emotional, and utterly transparent. He readily admitted he was still desperately in love with Wendy and devastated by their split. He also confirmed his profound disdain for Dan Markel, a man he viewed as a tormentor who was making Wendy's life a living hell. "I probably said 100 times in public that I'd like to kick his ass," he confessed, a statement that would have sealed his fate in a different context. He was, on paper, the perfect culprit, the spurned lover, driven by a jealous rage to eliminate his rival. But Jeff Lacasse had something Wendy Adelson knew she had: a perfect alibi. Credit card statements and multiple witnesses confirmed he was nowhere near Trescott Drive at the time of the murder. He was quickly and definitively cleared, but before he left, he gave the investigators the piece of the puzzle that would change everything. He told them about a conversation with Wendy, a detail she had conveniently omitted from her own extensive interview. He said Wendy had told him about a joke her brother Charlie had made. Charlie, ever the problem solver, had apparently looked into what it would take to make her Dan Markel problem disappear permanently. According to Lacasse, Wendy told him that Charlie had said hiring a hitman would cost around $15,000, but that it was ultimately cheaper to just buy her a new TV as a divorce gift. A joke. The second time the concept of a hitman had been raised, and this time it came with a name and a price tag. It was no longer a vague hypothetical. It was a specific, chilling anecdote attributed directly to Charlie Adelson. The joke landed with the force of a confession. The focus of the investigation, which had been tentatively pointed toward South Florida, now snapped into sharp, undeniable focus. It was aimed squarely at the flashy, charismatic dentist with the Mestro license plate. Charlie Adelson was a man who curated his life like a movie. He was the successful professional, the wealthy bachelor, the man with the answers. He drove fast cars, lived in a house with a grotto pool, and moved through the world with an air of untouchable confidence. He was also, by all accounts, fiercely protective of his little sister. He was deeply invested in her happiness, which meant he was deeply invested in her misery during the divorce. Suddenly, all the pieces clicked into place for investigators. A powerful, if circumstantial, narrative began to write itself. The Adelson family, a tight-knit, almost clannish unit, had become obsessed with Wendy's unhappiness. Frustrated by a legal system that refused to bend to their will, and unable to buy their way to a solution with $1 million offer, they had, perhaps, opted for a more direct approach. Charlie's joke now seemed less like a dark witticism and more like a moment of market research. A sinister trial balloon floated to gauge reaction, or perhaps even a veiled promise. But a compelling narrative, even one that makes perfect sense, is not the same as evidence that will stand up in court. Charlie Adelson was 500 miles from the crime scene, cocooned by his family's wealth and influence. To connect the untouchable dentist in Miami to the bloody garage in Tallahassee, detectives needed to find the foot soldiers. They needed to find the men who had actually driven the car and pulled the trigger. Their entire case now rested on finding one thing: the ghost car, that fleeting silver Prius. It was their only link, their only hope of bridging the vast gulf between two vastly different worlds. The hunt was on. Chapter 3. The Ghost Car and the Hunter's Trail. For months, the case went cold. The scent of a motive, so strong in the initial days, began to fade. The Adelson theory was compelling, a perfectly plotted story of family, wealth, and revenge. But it remained just that, a story, without a weapon, without a confession, without a single piece of physical evidence linking anyone to the crime scene. The investigation was adrift in a sea of speculation. Dan Markel's murder was on the verge of becoming another tragic, unsolved file gathering dust in a cabinet. The only hope lay in the one tangible yet maddeningly elusive clue: the fleeting image of a silver Prius. The Tallahassee Police Department and the FBI refused to let it go. They launched a search for the vehicle with a singular, obsessive focus. It was old-fashioned police work, a grinding, methodical process of elimination. They started in Dan's neighborhood, going door to door, begging for access to private security camera footage. They found nothing. The ghost car had slipped through the neighborhood's digital net. So they widened the search, meticulously reconstructing Dan Markel's last hours on Earth, hoping the killers had made a mistake somewhere along his final path. The first flicker of light in the darkness came from the unblinking eye of a security camera at the gym Dan visited that morning. There, in the grainy, time-stamped footage, the ghost took shape. At 9:13 a.m., Dan's car is seen pulling into the parking lot. Moments later, a silver Prius enters the frame. The video shows the Prius not merely parking, but circling, repositioning, its movements predatory and purposeful. It was like a shark gliding through the water, waiting. At 10:34 a.m., Dan emerges from the gym and drives away. Less than 30 seconds later, the Prius pulls out and follows him. This was the moment the case turned, as one investigator would later grimly state. At that point, he is being hunted. The footage was a revelation. It proved the killers had been on Dan's tail for at least an hour before the murder. This was not a random encounter. It was a planned, patient stalk. But the victory was incomplete. The video was too low resolution to capture a license plate or a clear image of the occupants. The hunters had been seen, but their faces remained in the shadows. It was a moment of inspired police work that provided the next crucial break. A veteran officer, frustrated by the lack of leads, had a thought. What about the city buses? Every bus was a mobile surveillance unit, its cameras silently recording the mundane flow of traffic across the city. It was a monumental task, but investigators began the painstaking process of collecting and reviewing hours upon hours of footage from every bus route that passed near Dan's neighborhood on the morning of the murder. And then, bingo, on the screen, there it was. At 10:47 a.m., a bus camera captured a crystal-clear image of the silver Prius on the same road Dan had taken home from the gym. Another bus camera caught the car again, just minutes after the shooting, heading away from the crime scene. The footage was sharp enough to confirm the movement of a passenger, strongly suggesting two people were inside. Forensic video analysts descended on the new evidence. They worked for weeks, enhancing the images, zooming in on every pixel. They still couldn't decipher the license plate, but they could now identify the car with startling precision. It was a Toyota Prius, model year between 2006 and 2009. And its color was not just silver, but a very specific factory shade called silver pine mica. They also spotted something else, a tiny detail on the windshield that would prove to be the key to the entire case. A Florida SunPass, the small electronic transponder used for automatic toll payments. The investigation, once stalled, was now moving at lightning speed. The search parameters narrowed dramatically. They were no longer looking for every silver Prius in Florida. They were looking for a silver pine mica Prius, model years 2006 to 2009, equipped with a SunPass that had traveled from South Florida to Tallahassee just before the murder and returned immediately after. They cross-referenced DMV records with SunPass toll data, feeding millions of data points into their system, waiting for the digital needle in the haystack. And they found it. A transponder, registered to a silver pine mica Prius, had triggered a toll reader on I-75 heading north toward Tallahassee on the afternoon of July 17th, the day before the murder. That same transponder had pinged a toll booth on the same highway, heading south on the evening of July 18th, just hours after Dan Markel was dead. The timeline was a perfect, damning match. The SunPass was registered to a small, nondescript car rental agency in North Miami. Detectives flew down and obtained the rental agreement. The name on the form was Luis Rivera. The paperwork listed his real address and cell phone number. It also, helpfully, listed a second number under the contact brother. A quick database search linked that number to a man named Sigfredo Garcia. A shiver went through the investigative team. These were not the names of disgruntled academics or wealthy dentists. The names belonged to men known to law enforcement. Sigfredo Garcia had a rap sheet that included robbery and burglary. Luis Rivera was a known quantity. a ranking member of the notoriously violent Latin Kings street gang. The pieces were now falling into place with terrifying speed. The Adelsons had their motive. These men had their methods. The digital trail, once cold, was now burning hot. Cell tower data placed the phones of both Rivera and Garcia in Tallahassee on the day of the murder, their movements mirroring Dan Markel's. Financial records led them to an ATM in Pembroke Pines, just outside Miami. Investigators pulled the security footage from the date of the homicide. The image on the screen was the final, irrefutable confirmation. There was the Silver Pine Mica Prius in the driver's seat, a clear shot of Luis Rivera. In the passenger seat, Sigfredo Garcia. It had taken nearly 2 years of relentless, grinding, brilliant police work. They had chased a ghost car from a single fleeting glimpse, through hours of security footage, and across a vast digital landscape of toll records and cell tower pings. The chase had led them from the quiet streets of Tallahassee to the hardened heart of the Miami underworld. In May 2016, heavily armed tactical teams descended on the two men. Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera were arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of Dan Markel. The arrests were a major breakthrough, a moment of triumph for the beleaguered investigators. But no one on the team believed the case was closed. These two men were the instruments of death, the hired hands. As the Tallahassee police chief announced to the press, this was, without a doubt, a murder for hire. The explosive question still hung in the air, more potent than ever. Who wrote the check? The digital trail had led them to the killers. Now, the far more dangerous journey began. To follow the money back to the masterminds. Chapter 4. The Nexus and the Trap. With the triggerman and his driver in steel bracelets, the investigation entered a new, more perilous phase. Sigfredo Garcia and Luis Rivera were the who and the how, but they were not the why. Investigators began dismantling their lives, searching for the person who had served as the bridge between their world of violent street crime and the Adelsons' world of suburban affluence. They soon found that in the wake of the murder, both men had been conspicuously, recklessly flush with cash. They were buying cars, motorcycles, and living large. Garcia, with a stunning lack of foresight, even posted pictures of his new toys on Facebook. This wasn't just a crime, it was a payday. The search for the paymaster, the go-between, led them to one person, a woman whose life was a tangled intersection of the two worlds. Her name was Catherine Katie Magbanua. On the surface, she was Sigfredo Garcia's ex-girlfriend and the mother of his two children. But a deeper dive into her life revealed a far more complex and damning reality. Catherine Magbanua had also been carrying on a long-term romantic relationship with the man at the center of the prosecution's theory, Dr. Charlie Adelson. She was the nexus, the human link, the linchpin of the entire conspiracy. She was the girlfriend of the suspected mastermind and the mother of the accused killer's children. This discovery was the Rosetta Stone of the case, a revelation that connected the previously disparate threads of the investigation into a single, terrifying tapestry. Investigators tore into Magbanua's finances and uncovered a pattern that screamed guilt. In the year following Dan Markel's murder, her bank accounts, once the repository of a bartender's modest income, saw an influx of over $100,000 in cash deposits. Her lifestyle underwent a dramatic upgrade. But the money wasn't just untraceable cash. There were direct payments from the source. She was receiving regular paychecks from the Adelson Institute, the family dental practice, for a job no one could describe. The checks, for a supposed no-show job, were signed by the family matriarch, Donna Adelson. It was a clear, unambiguous channel for funneling money. The Adelsons' generosity was not limited to bogus paychecks. Charlie had gifted Katie a Lexus, a car previously registered to his father. He had also, investigators learned, paid for half of her breast enhancement surgery. He was showering her with the trappings of a life she could never have afforded on her own. Was it the largesse of a wealthy boyfriend? Or was it a series of calculated payments for services rendered the ultimate, most final service of all? The prosecution's theory, once a collection of strong suspicions, now solidified into a coherent narrative. Charlie Adelson, driven by a pathological need to fix his sister Wendy's life and liberate her from the man he saw as her tormentor, had set the murder plot in motion. He couldn't get his hands dirty, so he used his girlfriend, Katie Magbanua, as his cutout. Katie, in turn, leveraged her connection to the father of her children, Sigfredo Garcia, a man with the skills and the lack of moral compass to carry out such a task. Garcia then recruited his associate from the Latin Kings, Luis Rivera, as his backup and driver. The payment, a cool $100,000, flowed like a current down this chain of command, from the Adelsons through Katie to the men who pulled the trigger. It was a beautiful, elegant, and horrifying theory, but it was still built on a foundation of circumstantial evidence. There was no recording of the initial conversation, no signed contract. To get the kind of hard evidence needed to convict a wealthy, well-lawyered family, investigators knew they had to do something drastic. They had to rattle the cage. They decided to spring a trap of their own. In April 2016, the FBI orchestrated a sophisticated undercover sting. An agent, posing as a friend of the imprisoned Luis Rivera, was tasked with approaching Donna Adelson. He found her on a street in Miami. With the casual menace of a professional, he handed her a piece of paper. It was a flyer with a news article about the Markel murder. Scrawled on it were two things, $5,000 and a phone number. "You're taking care of Katie and Garcia," the agent said, his voice low, "but you're not taking care of my boy." It was a blackmail attempt, a demand for hush money, designed to trigger panic and force the conspirators to talk. The effect was instantaneous and profound. Donna Adelson, the unflappable matriarch, was visibly shaken. And the first thing she did was call her son Charlie. The FBI, armed with a wiretap warrant, was listening to every word. The series of phone calls that followed over the next few days were a symphony of incriminating panic. Donna told Charlie that some paperwork had been hand-delivered to her. Charlie, immediately understanding that this was not a lawsuit, asked with grim urgency, "Does it involve me or other people?" Their conversation was a dance of pronouns and euphemisms. They never spoke the names. They never mentioned the murder. But their shared, secret knowledge was the unspoken third party on the line. Charlie's next call was to Catherine Magbanua. The urgency in his voice was now laced with pure fear. He told her about the approach on his mother, the demand for money. They spoke in a clumsy, transparent code about properties and business, their words a thin veil over the terror beneath. The wiretaps captured their world shrinking, the walls closing in. In a subsequent meeting at a noisy Miami restaurant, with FBI agents sitting at a nearby table, the conversation allegedly turned deadly. According to the probable cause affidavit filed by the state, Charlie told Katie that if this blackmailer was for real, he would have to be eliminated. "You better kill him because he's going to be a big problem," he reportedly said. "If you can't do it, I'll have someone else do it." The sting didn't produce a neatly packaged confession, but it did something arguably more powerful. It captured the raw, unfiltered panic of guilty people. Their coded, frantic reactions were not those of innocents caught in a bizarre misunderstanding. They were the reactions of co-conspirators whose pact of silence had just been violently breached. This was enough. In October 2016, armed with the wiretaps and the extensive financial trail, prosecutors arrested Catherine Magbanua. She was charged with first-degree murder, joining her ex-partner Sigfredo Garcia as a co-defendant. The trial was finally on the horizon. But before the courtroom battle could begin, the state received an unexpected gift. Luis Rivera, the man behind the wheel of the Prius, the silent witness to the murder, decided his loyalty to his co-conspirators was not worth a lethal injection. Facing the death penalty, he cracked. He agreed to a plea deal. In exchange for his full and truthful testimony against everyone involved, he would plead guilty to second-degree murder and receive a reduced sentence. The getaway driver was now the state's star witness, ready to take the stand and guide the jury down the entire bloody road that led from Miami to Dan Markel's garage. Chapter 5. The Trial, the Stage, and the Verdicts. The trial of Sigfredo Garcia and Catherine Magbanua, which convened in the autumn of 2019, was more than a legal proceeding. It was theater. It was the public unveiling of a 5-year investigation that had spanned the length of Florida and exposed the darkest corners of human nature. The Tallahassee courtroom was the stage, and prosecutor Georgia Kappelman was the director, ready to present her sprawling, complex narrative of a conspiracy born from family obsession and executed by hired killers. Her story for the jury was simple in its horrifying premise. The Adelson family, desperate to win a custody battle they had already lost in court, hired their son's girlfriend, Catherine Magbanua, to contract a hit on their former son-in-law. Magbanua, the crucial intermediary, then hired the father of her children, Sigfredo Garcia, who in turn recruited his gang associate, Luis Rivera, to help carry out the murder. Charlie Adelson's name hung over the proceedings like a shroud. Though he sat not at the defense table but in his Miami dental office, Kappelman labeled him an unindicted co-conspirator, painting him as the ghost in the machine, the puppet master pulling the strings from afar. The prosecution's first act was its star witness, Luis Rivera. Dressed in a jail jumpsuit, the Latin King's gang member took the stand and, in a flat, dispassionate tone, walked the jury through the anatomy of a murder. He testified that Garcia had offered him a cut of a $100,000 payday for a job in North Florida. He detailed their first failed attempt in June 2014, a dry run where they couldn't locate their target. He then recounted the second successful trip in July, describing the methodical stalking of Dan Markel from his home to his children's preschool to the gym and back again. He described the final brutal moments with the cold detachment of a man recounting a day at the office, pulling the Prius into position, Garcia leaping out, the two muffled pops of the gun, and the silent, high-speed escape. Rivera's testimony also forged the critical link in the money trail. He told the jury that after the murder, both Garcia and Catherine Magbanua delivered his share of the blood money, around $35,000 in cash. And he offered a peculiar, unforgettable detail. The $100 bills were bundled in stacks held together not by paper bands but by staples. This strange detail was powerfully corroborated by another witness, June Umchinda, a former girlfriend of Charlie Adelson. She testified that she, too, had seen stacks of cash at Charlie's house bundled with staples, a bizarre practice she had even teased him about. It was a small, strange detail that resonated with the unmistakable ring of truth. The defense attorneys launched a blistering assault on Rivera. They depicted him as a sociopathic liar, a career criminal who had been handed the deal of a lifetime and was now singing whatever song the prosecution wanted to hear to save his own skin from a death sentence. They floated the theory that Rivera himself was the shooter, now cynically pinning the crime on their clients. With Rivera's testimony anchoring the timeline, Kappelman began building the circumstantial case around it. She presented Catherine Magbanua's bank records, a stark financial ledger of her transformation from a struggling single mom to a woman with a river of unexplained cash flowing through her life. She played the wiretap recordings from the FBI's sting, allowing the jury to hear the panicked, coded conversations between Charlie Adelson and Katie Magbanua for themselves. Then came the trial's most anticipated moment, the testimony of Wendy Adelson. Granted full immunity by the state, she walked into the courtroom not as a potential suspect, but as a witness. Her demeanor was a world away from the sobbing, disheveled woman in the 2014 interrogation video. She was now the picture of poise and control, a polished law professor answering questions with careful, lawyerly precision. She calmly denied any knowledge of or involvement in any plot. When confronted with her brother's infamous joke about the hitman, she dismissed it as dark humor, typical of Charlie's often inappropriate wit. She was an ice sculpture of composure, deflecting every probing question, admitting nothing and revealing nothing. "Do you know who killed Dan Markel?" the defense lawyer asked her, point blank. "No," she replied, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. The defense for Catherine Magbanua leaned into the narrative that she was a victim herself, a pawn in a deadly game played by powerful people. Her lawyers argued she was guilty only of being entangled with two dangerous and manipulative men, her violent ex, Garcia, and her wealthy, controlling boyfriend, Charlie. The prosecution, they claimed, was so desperate to nail an Adelson that they were willing to sacrifice an innocent woman to do it. In a stunning, high-stakes gamble, Katie Magbanua decided to testify in her own defense. She walked to the stand and, looking the jury in the eye, denied everything. The money? Tips from her job as a bottle girl in exclusive Miami clubs, she claimed, where cash flowed like champagne. The payments from Charlie? Gifts from a generous lover. She insisted she had never been a bagman, never a conduit for blood money. But under the prosecutor's relentless cross-examination, her story developed a shocking twist. While steadfastly maintaining her own innocence, she was asked the ultimate question: did she believe Charlie Adelson was involved? The courtroom held its breath. "Yes," Katie said, her voice quiet but clear. It was an astonishing moment of betrayal and self-preservation. She was throwing her former lover and benefactor under the bus, painting herself